Hello and welcome to another episode of Gaming at the Round Table with Maverick, Crystal, and myself, Jojo. Today we're going to be touching a topic that's kind of in and out of things. It just depends on which way you look at it. But the overall title, I would say, is the early access model that a lot of gaming companies are kind of defaulting to. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with their risk management and their adapting to the overly used live service model. And I'm going to touch on those two real quick and then kind of let them aim at their targets that they have lined up. But I think with the live service, I think that's so commonplace these days. And I think that's a big gripe with a lot of people in the gaming community. In the sense that like live service is giving you something, it's not finished.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the gripe across the board with any of these models is that you're getting something that's not to what it should be, and it feels it's kind of like an underhanded way of like them getting it out there and saying, well, do they like it or do they not like it? If they don't like it, we're going to pull it, which I'm going to use PlayStation's biggest crash of 2024 and Concord and I can't figure out why they went through with the whole thing when they could have tested that out a little bit better and then just said like, hey, this isn't going to go where we want it to go, and then pull it. Mav, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think AAA titles have made enough games to where they should be able to know their market. And we, you kind of questioned, like, why did they release this if it clearly had no market? I think it's really important to highlight the level at which we're talking, right? The standards to which we're talking. An indie developer, for example, especially if we're talking like a one-man army, he's going to make what he's making, or she's going to make what she's making because she likes it and she thinks it's going to work, and she has her little small tiny bubble. AAA titles have track records, they have whole research departments, right? So I think that I'm not a fan of AAA titles doing early access. I don't think Concord should have had an early access, but I also want to acknowledge what you said. It might have saved them some PR.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a burning plane, ship, just dumpster, bad idea.
Kind of like
But
real Concorde planes.
yeah, just shoot. But one of the things that when I did my research on kind of the topic, and one of the things that came up a lot was the risk management asset or aspect of developing a game. Because I mean, it can be pretty risky to like make a game because you either find your audience or you don't. And like you just mentioned, there's little like we'll call them mom and pop studios that develop something and it's their love project. And regardless of if anybody even plays it, they don't care because they did it for fun. I mean, if you look at one of the biggest franchises today, Minecraft, that was a love project. I don't think he like fully intended it to get to the scale that it's at. And then there's a game, Crystal, you really like to play.
Sorry.
Stardew Valley.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
That both of those you are perfect examples of just, hey, I'm going to make something just because I want to make it, and then it just turns into something amazing. So it's understandable to have that, but I think the live service model is a counter to like that little community. It's just kind of like we're giving you something complete.
You touched on something by accident there, and that's, I don't think those most famous indie titles had early access. Another very famous indie development game studio that we talk about often, as certainly I do, is the developers of Hades 2. Supergiant Games. So Hades 1, I don't think had an early access, but for sure, I won't say for sure until I know 100%, but I'm very confident that their first couple of games, Bastion, Transistor, they had another basketball like one. Their games weren't early access. It's Hades 2 for sure is early access. I don't recall if they did Hades 1. That was after they made their splash, interestingly enough. And a lot of the games that are doing early access and playing like the indie card, interestingly, are no longer indies, really. And I won't attack them, but I will use a real world example in the very recent past. So, what is the Path of Exile 2?
Mm.
Path of Exile was an indie game made by some, I think, Australian-based indie development studio. They did well. They established a track record. They made a lot of money, and they were actually bought by Tencent, a small little company and based out of China. And by small, I mean freaking massive, huge company with all sorts of like news about them. So they got acquired. Path of Exile 2 is not an indie title. They are doing the indie thing, despite me feeling like it's really not that indie, of early access. I don't want to go too down the rabbit hole, but I'll say one more thing until I circle back, which is they have a frequently asked questions section on the Epic Games Store that I bookmarked for myself because I thought it was just beautiful for this conversation. And I need to prove my date of birth, apparently. So that's going to take me a second. I'll circle back to it. And I want to highlight a couple of the questions that they get and their answer to it. And you guys are going to see it's very much, oh, well, we want like that. It's very like Google when they became huge in the development industry. We want to have like a good community and we want all this feedback. And it's important. Right. And it's like, yeah, okay, but Tencent is $1 billion company, bro. It's like you have all of the data you need. That is not why you're doing early access. I'll circle back, though.
Crystal, you want to take aim at your targets?
See, mine, okay, so the gaming company that made this game is called Gameloft. And originally I was like, oh, I was doing my research on it. I don't really see a whole lot on Gameloft. Maybe it's small. It is not a small company. First of all, it was made by one of the 5 founders of Ubisoft. So that should say everything you need to know. Secondly, this early access game is a Disney game. Why? Why are you doing early access?
Yeah, a company along with early anything doesn't make much sense.
No, and it gets worse. Hold on. I need to really dive into this, right? The game that I'm talking about is Disney Dreamlight Valley. I was so stoked for this game because it's like a Stardew Valley, but it's Disney. Like, that's so cool. You get all these original characters. You get to do some farming. You get to do some decorating. Really neat. So when this game was originally announced, early access was $30. Yikes. Okay, I got to pay for early access. This game made you pay for early access and stated, as a matter of fact, if you go look on their website and stuff like that, it still states, this is supposed to be a free-to-play game. They had the course planned to make this game free-to-play. They never went through with that. It's still, to this day, $30. This game came out in 2022. That was now going on 3 years ago. Is it still
calling itself early access?
No, the early access ended as of 2023, a year after the early access, and that's when they made the announcement that they would not be going free to play.
So you did early access to support the developer, which I think Crystal and I feel the same about this. I'll support a developer that I really like through their development process if I feel like they need it, right? So Disney, it costs $200. Like, we have Disney in our state. It
costs more than $200.
They own a city, right? Maybe more than one, for that matter. So that corporation does not need assistance, or really oh man. Anyway, so where does early access belong? What is its intent, right? And I feel like the intent is to get feedback from the community to make sure you're on the right track. If that is all someone says, okay, fine. You want to make sure you're on the right track. But is it really early access, or is it just 1.0 that we pay for, and then you actually listen to community feedback, which good on you, right? But don't call it early access if it's a fully fledged game. You don't need help funding it, right? It's just a live service model masked as something else. And that goes back to what Joe was saying.
Right. Yeah. A lot of these early access games only let you go up to a certain point. So, for instance, there's a game that I've played, I've even done a review on, Fields of Mystria. It's still in early access, Now, I didn't realize this, maybe because I didn't read the finer print, but it is still in early access. And then my friend, who is also playing the game, has just reached a wall. Like, there's a lot of like things that you see that are like teases of things that are gonna come. So like I feel like they don't give you everything off the bat, right? They just want to make sure that you like it enough, and then they'll fully release it or augment things or whatever. But at what point does that become like a beta test? Like what
That's what I was just gonna
distinguishes
say.
what distinguishes the differences? I don't quite understand.
I think they took the alpha and the beta models, and then they kind of like, for lack of better terms, bastardized it into a money grab type thing.
It's
where
live service before the game is officially released.
officially
Yeah.
live.
It's the way for the big corporations and small corporations to go to a live service model regardless of the genre of game that they have. So if you're not making a Fortnite or an Apex Legends or whatever other live service game, you can still get in on that cash cow, because we'll just say, hey, community, we want your feedback. So we're going to do early access. And by early access, I mean milk you for everything you have, because that's live service. If you ignore timeline, before, after release, whatever, early access is live service. You're paying for the continued development of a game after you've already acquired it, so that they add more content for you to keep playing that game. They keep making more money, you keep playing the game. That's what live service is. And early access, to use Joe's term here, has been bastardized to really just milk as much from the consumer, because the term live service is no longer cool. It is no longer kosher. Consumers don't like that term anymore. We saw Concord, the aforementioned failure. One of the major reasons it failed is because it was a live service game, and people aren't going to pay for something when the competition's saturated. I feel strongly about that, obviously.
Now that you mention it, something that my friend did mention to me was that Fields of Mystria actually did get an update. So it's getting updates in its early access stage, which again, I am not upset that Fields of Mystria has early access, because it is not a AAA title. I'm okay with this being a thing. As a matter of fact, the earlier I get to play it, the happier I am, a lot of times. But like the game doesn't come out until it doesn't even say a date, sometime this year, and it's already had updates. Like at that point, again, where's the line? Like this is just an early access game that we're getting updates on.
To go a step further, I feel like it's one of it. So for example, we're concerned about funding. We have about as minimal funding as we can get for a game. So the things we research as a small indie firm are like, how, should we set up a Patreon? Should we set up a GoFundMe, a coffee? You know, how can people assist us through our development process? I feel like games or companies that are a little too big to do that are using early access as a substitution for that, even on the indie front. So I'm very excited to try out Hyper Light Breaker. We talked about it on a recent podcast. Very excited. But on their official announcements, they said, we're going to go early access. I think it's like the 17th of this month. Again, I'm excited about it. I'm going to try it out. I'll pay for it if I have to. But their reasoning was to get feedback from the community, make sure they're on the right track, all kosher. But then they say, we'll be in it for at least a year. And it's like, okay, is this not like... The game is playable. So you're saying that at minimum, you're getting a playable game that for some reason is not ready for 1.0 for at least a year. Is it playable or is it not playable? And early access is just such a gray area. It gives me the ick.
Yeah, I feel like there's two ways to early access. One is what they would call the alpha beta, where people would get a code and put it in and
the
play
true
it.
alphas and betas.
And I feel like those are like 2 hours, 3 hours, an hour of gameplay, right? Whereas, again, early access, you get a great chunk of the game, but like we're just going to keep updating it. I don't know, man. At
And
that
I think
point,
with
just make it a
certain
live
games,
service game.
yeah, and I think with certain games you can't do it, and I think they're trying to do it in games that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Where if you think of an RPG or you think of something that has a significant story time or interaction time, is what I'll say, and then you look at other games. For example, like if I played an early access fighting game and it has like 10 characters, I sit. There's
You've played
only
the game.
so many times. Yeah, like there's
Yeah.
only so many times I could do that. If it's got a good player loop or it's like a competitive thing, I can see sticking with it. But to the length that they're doing these at
a year, yeah.
I don't understand how you could say that that's not the actual like.
Yeah,
Also-
because on your
Sorry, go
point
ahead.
there, I'm sorry. On your point there, you know, how am I supposed to stay in love with this game for a year?
They don't care as long as you paid for it already.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
and you mentioned something, Crystal, like alpha beta is what it used to be. And I'm going to triple down on my comparison of current early access 2025 to the notion of being just another term for a live service model that's specific to before a game officially launches. And the reason I say that is because alpha and betas, they end.
Yeah.
You play that alpha, it ends, they get the feedback, they make the changes, and then they either release or they have like a beta 2.0 or something. But I remember Guild Wars 2, free game. They had an alpha and a beta. I participated. It was very fun, just enough to get me teased. Then it ended, and then the official game came out. So that seems to be going the way of the dinosaur in 2025. So expect that trend to continue because it's profitable for it to be early access. But I think this is us putting our line in the sand and going, hey, industry, we see what you're doing, okay?
This isn't like, hey, no, yes, no, it's that.
This
No,
is
it's
live
not.
service in 2025. We call it early access.
Yeah.
Mav, did you want to touch on one more thing, or we just wrap it up on that?
I'll take a couple of seconds to just say Hyperlight Breaker devs, I am actually really excited about it. I only use you as an example.
That's what I'm saying about Fields of Mystery. Like, I'm okay with you guys doing it. Sort of. The whole
We're talking
Disney,
about the
or no,
industry.
I'm thinking of the different one. The Disney one, I'm not okay with.
Yeah.
We're saying the big guys get
No.
away from it. The little guys, we get it. We're
Right.
there.
Yeah.
But again, thank you for joining us for another episode of Gaming Out the Round Table with Maverick, Crystal, and myself, JoJo. You guys have a good one.
Bye.
Take care.